Hello, and welcome to the Literate Ghost. My name is Randall, and my hobby is collecting classic ghost stories. Today, I would like to talk a little bit about one of the unsung heroes of the classic ghost story. This is not a biography exactly, but more along the lines of a note of acknowledgement, of recognition, for a man whose work has contributed greatly to the way in which contemporary readers envision the world of the classic ghost story, but who is very rarely, if ever, spoken of in that context. The man I'm referring to is this gentleman, John Atkinson Grimshaw. Now, that name may or may not be known to you, but for enthusiasts of the classic ghost story, his work is very likely to be at least somewhat familiar. Grimshaw was a prominent and prolific artist of the Victorian era. He specialized in realistic depictions of nighttime scenes, or nocturnes as they were called, especially landscapes and cityscapes, by moonlight. Now, I first became aware of Grimshaw's work when I realized that many of the books in my library had covers that seemed to have a very similar feel to them, a distinctive style and texture that was unmistakable. At that point, I began to pay more attention to the design and illustration credits on my books, something I must admit that I hadn't previously given much consideration to. And of course, I found that Grimshaw's work was present on a handful of my ghost story collections. Okay, more than a handful. Grimshaw's paintings have graced the covers of numerous ghost story anthologies and collected works, some of my favorites being the Oxford Press English and Victorian Ghost Story collections, and of course my favorite edition of illustrated Strand reprints of Sherlock Holmes. His works are also found as accompaniment to countless ghost story blogs and websites, and of course they play a large part in illustrating those ubiquitous news articles that pop up every Halloween and Christmas time. So why Grimshaw? Why paintings, and not photographs or modern illustrations? Obviously, there are plenty of other options available to publishers of classic ghost stories. So why are these old paintings such a popular choice? Well, there are several reasons that I can think of. Number one, subject matter. Moonlit cobblestone streets with massive old Victorian houses looming in the darkness, often with solitary figures alone and unsheltered in the night. I mean, could you get any better than this for a ghost story? Companion to number one, there is no doubt that Grimshaw's paintings evoke a strong emotional response. His use of light and shadow turned mere subject matter into a moody and nearly palpable atmosphere of isolation and vulnerability. To quote the master of the classic ghost story, M.R. James, two ingredients most invaluable in the concocting of a ghost story are, to me, atmosphere and the nicely managed crescendo. Grimshaw provides the first ingredient quite well. On the more cynical side of things, it is possible, of course, that a large part of Grimshaw's popularity could be attributed to the fact that his work, for the most part, is in the public domain, and is therefore free to use for such things. I can't imagine that this would be of much use, however, if his work didn't meet the first 2 points. And now for my 2 cents. I do have a fourth reason, but it's mostly of my own opinion. While many may not consider cover art to be of much importance in telling a good ghost story, I have to admit that I believe it may play a bigger part than most people think. Don't get me wrong, I would absolutely love to have a library full of old, time-worn, leather-bound volumes rather than modern, full-color dust covers. I can only dream. But cover art can serve a purpose. Obviously, it can help to indicate the content of the enclosed stories, and set the tone and mood for the reader. But it can also help us envision the setting, the time, and place that these stories occur. And it's here that contemporary readers are at a disadvantage, I think, compared to our Victorian counterparts. Victorian era authors would have expected their audience to be familiar with the world about which they were writing, a world without cell phones, televisions, computers, cars, or electric lights. It was a world of gas lamps, candles, and horse-drawn carriages. And that world no longer exists. There is no one alive today that experienced it for themselves.
Modern readers often forget that when we watch a period piece in the movie theater or on television, that we are not actually looking at the time period represented as it really was. We're looking at a reproduction, a modern interpretation of the past, an educated guess. And yes, even these paintings are an interpretation, one man's interpretation of the world in which he lived.
But that's the point, isn't it? These paintings represent the vision of a man that experienced that world firsthand. And I think that's worthy of some consideration.
So, while there are, of course, plenty of options for ghost story illustrations, you really can't go wrong with Grimshaw. As I said, just a note of acknowledgement for the paintings he created on canvas and for the paintings that he helped create in our imagination. A sincere thank you to John Atkinson Grimshaw. And a sincere thanks to you for watching. I hope to see you next time.